Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Kristina Kuprina, and doing the monthly outlook on the economy or updates on the economy, along with smart tax planning strategies. Why smart tax planning strategies? Because we just are getting out of tax season right now. And as I'm working with people, especially newer people I haven't done planning with yet, I see a lot of things, a lot of opportunities to potentially save a lot of money just by making a few tweaks on the way they do things throughout the year in the short term as well as the long term in planning. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some ideas in just a moment. For any of you who are new to watching this, I have been told that people are sharing these recordings with other people and people are seeing them for the first time. And I haven't done necessarily a good job of explaining who I am and why I'm doing this. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Kristina Kuprina, Chief Economist at Sequoia Wealth Advisors. And really the purpose and intention of doing this is kind of connecting the economy with your life. And I'm making a lot of the stuff you may hear in the news or from your social media or from your friends make sense. And so in order to do that, what's really valuable is send in your questions, please. I will read every one of the questions that come in and I will do my very best to answer them. So please make this time as valuable as possible. Tell me what it is you want to know about. What have you heard? What are you thinking? What are your questions? And maybe it's something I've said, maybe it's something you've heard, or even just maybe it's just an idea, a topic for thought and conversation. I have my things to talk about today, but I do keep this really open and really free flowing so that everyone gets the most value out of it. There is a lot going on. Always, there's a lot going on, but especially right now, a combination of an election year, combination of some significant underpinnings within the economy. So there's quite a lot I can talk about. Really love to have it as relevant and as useful and as valuable to everyone who's listening today. So what I'd like to do is also mention I got a lot of questions in advance. So thank you for those of you that send them in advance. I know that we have 100 and something people registered, but only so many people can show up live. So I really like it when you send the questions. So when you watch it later, you know that I'll answer them. Final thing I want to say is if you have a question you don't want to bring up here in a public forum, you can always reach out to me. Just say, hey, listen to the webinar. I have a question for you. Happy to give you the information, either by email or by phone, just so, again, you have the information. The big reason that I do this is oftentimes economic data is not really said in a way that really connects to people in their lives and is relevant. Also, oftentimes, unfortunately, the media cherry picks information to promote a specific narrative, especially in an election year, but now it seems like it's all the time. So kind of a way of just kind of bringing a lot of this information back to what it really means. And also sometimes things you may not be aware of that's happening, kind of like the underpinnings of what's happening in the economy outside of the headlines. So with that being said, again, send in your questions. I'm going to start off with, because I'm going to kind of filter in some of the tax ideas also within some of the economic data. But the highest thing to say on tax planning or smart tax planning or strategic tax planning is many people, and with all respect to our CPAs and their diligence and their knowledge and their work, they are generally backwards looking. They're going to look at what happened to you last year, and they're going to take that information and tell you how much you owe, or if you're one of the fortunate few, how much you're getting back. So that's backwards looking, right? This happened. This is the law of the land, putting all that in and saying this is what you owe. But however, there are many, many things that can be done to minimize taxes if you plan for them in advance. Some things are within that year. Other things are long-term planning. So I'm going to touch upon those things first before I get into the economy. That way, anyone that's just here for the tax planning ideas can get that. Don't have to listen to the rest. So tax planning, you want to think about is, let's use a calendar year as an example. What are the best things to do in that calendar year to reduce your taxes for that calendar year? However, we also want to look beyond that. What can you do that will maybe not necessarily reduce your taxes much now, but make a huge difference down the road? And I'm going to use retirement as opposed to working years as a great example of this because that applies to most people. When you're working, a lot of times the common wisdom is put as much money as possible away in the 401k or 403b or retirement plan through work, or in your IRA if you're not working. The idea is to reduce your taxes now while you're working and earning, to have potentially lower taxes in the future when you're no longer earning and working. However, that is not really usually the reality of most people's lives. For the most part, people's taxes are about the same after they stop working as they are when they're working. The reason being is that our expenses generally don't decline in retirement. If anything, they go up, right? More travel, more free time, more opportunities to spend money. So if you have enough savings, generally the taxes do not decline meaningfully in retirement, with the exception of situations where people pay off a mortgage at retirement, move to a much lower cost area, really downsize their life. There are times it can happen, but not most of the time. So does it make more sense to pay a little bit more taxes when you're working and earning, and then pay a lot less taxes when you're drawing down your savings in your pile of savings? Psychologically, I can tell you what feels better to me, right? I'd much rather not pay as much taxes when I'm not earning and I'm living off my savings. While I'm working, I feel like I have more of a I'm earning, I'm working kind of mentality. Each person in every situation is going to be different. Financial planning can help look at the optimal way to do it, because oftentimes it's a little bit of both on both sides of it. Accumulation, working, distribution, retirement. But looking at that and looking at strategies is how much you put into a Roth, how much you put into an IRA, how much you put to the 401k, as opposed to other savings vehicles. Highly personalized. I don't want to sound like I'm pitching Sequoia services, but some form of financial planning will really help understand it in your specific situation, because everyone's plan is unique. But just an idea of a high level consideration, not a recommendation, that's planning, is putting more money into a Roth, not necessarily having tax savings now, but not paying taxes in retirement. The numbers are staggering. When we do analysis, when Katie and I, our financial planner, do the analysis for clients, the numbers are staggering on how much money can be saved on taxes. And that's under today's tax rates. The tax rates are almost certainly going to be higher in the future, which you'll understand when you listen to the economic portion of this. But that being said, optimizing not just the automatic put it into the 401k, many employers now have a 401k Roth option. So that can be done right there through your company plan. And the exact ratios, again, will depend on your company's plan and also your individual financial plan as well. So that's a really, really, really big one that can apply to almost everybody. Also, when you're young and saving, you may save in a certain way through your retirement plans and then shift those ratios as you get older or as your earnings change. And each year we want to look at that again and again. What if in 1 year you had a big event, a big bonus that year, you sold a property, something happened where your income went way up? Maybe that year we do things really differently, and then we go back to the regular way after that. So being proactive, but also being adaptable to changes. Again, the numbers are significant. You don't feel them at the moment, but boy, do they make a big difference on the back end. Imagine a world where you can draw out, I'm just throwing out a number here, $100,000 a year, but be in a $50,000 or even lower tax bracket to do that, right? That means you have less of your savings going to the government and a lot more of it staying in your own pocket. This type of planning is really available to everyone, regardless of your income levels, regardless of your net worth levels. It's how to optimize that for your specific situation. Big tax savings, but it requires long-term thinking and strategic planning. Another really big one I see a lot is the good investments, but in the wrong type of account. Some types of investments are really, really tax efficient. Those ideally are going to be in a taxable account. There's other investments are very tax inefficient, or strategies within trading and portfolio management. Those are better set in a retirement account. The big differences can be found on the 1099s, right? How much can be done to reduce those taxes? It's not how well the portfolio does. It's how much you keep after the taxes are paid on that portfolio. So again, looking at things holistically, sometimes it's a regular portfolio strategy. Those of you who know me well know that I'm really hard to get a hold of at the end of the year because I am so busy reviewing all of your portfolios and tax harvesting. But I'm not just doing it at the end of the year, I'm doing it throughout the year. But the end of the year is the big glut of that. I always call it the gift you don't even know, you don't even see it except in your 1099. Is there any strategies I can do throughout the year to reduce your taxes, but also have a really good portfolio? It's an extra little gift. Like I said, you don't see it on the performance, but you really appreciate it on taxes at the moment and also long term. Another one there is loss banking. There's different terms or words for this, but there's a strategy that might sound crazy when I tell you about it, that we actually want to lose some money on paper. We really want to lose money. There's a whole lot of ways to do that very creatively, but we can do that. We loss bank that. And let's say you're going to sell a house. Oh, now we're going to take that out and offset it against another gain. Okay, that makes a really, really big difference. It's a really common strategy that I do when I know that someone has an event coming up where they're going to have a big gain year. We lost bank. And sometimes that lost bank can go for years and years and years because we know a business is going to be sold. We know an expensive asset's going to be sold. We know something's going to happen. Really can be meaningful numbers there as well if you plan in advance for it. I won't take a ton of time getting into the details about that, but these are all things I'm doing in the background. And as part of the financial plan at Sequoia, but it's also something to be aware of for anyone out there in planning. Again, I'm going to put one more out, then I'll jump into economy. I'll come back to taxes. Another one that's really, really good to look at is when you are paying off debt. Some debt is tax advantage and some is not. So when we're looking at what order, if you have, let's say, an auto loan and you have a HELOC on the home or a mortgage and you have different types of debt, student loan debt, etc., how do we pay it off in what order depends on the tax treatment of that debt. That can make a really big difference as well, depending on that debt and how you do it and timing. And it's always looking at, would it be better here or here or here? Sometimes we don't even think it's a good idea to pay off certain types of debt. It's actually giving you a big tax advantage, knowing that we have the ability to in the future if that law changed, right? Oh, the government took that away. Okay, fine, let's just go pay it off. So that is planning, that is strategy. Why do I love tax strategy so much? I love it because it's risk-free return. It's one of the few times I can actually use the word guaranteed. Right? If we can pay less in taxes, it is more money in your pocket for you to spend, for you to save, for you to give, whatever that purpose is in your life. Tax strategy oftentimes is something that's almost like an afterthought. People focus on the portfolio performance, they focus on their income needs, they focus on this, but every dollar we can save in taxes is going to put more money in your pocket and potentially make the plan even more successful because we've saved that area. Last one I'm going to say, and then again I'll hop over to the economic, is going to sound again a little odd, overfunding your 401k. Okay? It sounds odd, right? How could you overfund your 401k? Very much the reason I talked about earlier. The 401k traditional is money you put away now for the tax advantage today. But when you pull it out in the future, it's taxed at ordinary income levels. And depending on what your income levels are and what state you live in, those numbers can be very high, 40% or more, right? Taxed. So you have that much less actually saved than you think you do, which is a thing that catches a lot of people. They say, oh, I've got X amount, put aside my 401k, I've got plenty of money. Not once the government gets their hand in there. So every distribution you take is ordinary income. Depending on what tax bracket you're in will depend on the amount that's taken. Why was we overfunding it? Is it better to put less in there, some in a 401k Roth if it's available through your employer, some in other vehicles? Because what happens is there's a thing called the tax cliff. When, depending on your age, when you hit 73 or 75, under the current law, this has just recently been updated, you have to start taking a certain amount out of those accounts, whether you want the money or not. And the government is going to take their tax. There are a couple of strategies, actually really one major way that you can get around that, which is by donating to charity once you're over 70 and a half. However, that's something you do with extra money, not the money you actually need to live on. So proper planning can help minimize your risk of hitting that tax cliff where you have to pull all this money out because of your age and because of the government's regulations, IRS regulations. That happens, and then you're just paying all these taxes on money you don't need, and then your pile is shrinking even though you're not spending it. So there's plenty of strategies too, even if you have overfunded or you're on the path of overfunding, there's plenty of strategies to kind of correct that and minimize the risk of that tax cliff. That is important financial planning just to see, and it's something you can plan well in advance for. Even if you're really close to that age, there's still some strategies that may make sense. So definitely look at that. Again, just looking at ways to hold some of that aside. When I say hold some aside from the government. And I just want to throw a little fun thing in there. Sometimes I hear people say, I don't mind paying the taxes. Our government needs the money. Our police, our firefighters, that's usually local. But let's even say the nation. Yes, of course, the nation needs our tax revenue to run. However, as I'm going to segue into the economic component to it is, government spending means that roughly for individual taxpayers on a federal level, this does not count for state, on a federal level, 40% of your tax dollars are going to pay interest on our debt. So because our government loves to spend and loves to issue debt, 40 cents on your tax dollar, individuals on the federal, is going to pay interest on the debt. That number is going to skyrocket in upcoming years. Why? Because as the debt comes due, as the bonds come due, the government doesn't pay them off. You notice that? They don't pay them off. They just roll them over. What has happened to interest rates in the last couple of years? You guessed it, they're up. So they roll over that 2% treasury. Now they got to pay 5 or more, depending on the bill, right? So that being said, though, that cost is going to go up. There's talk in Washington, well, we need more revenue. We're going to raise the taxes on the wealthy. It sounds great politically. There's not enough money there. There's not even close to enough money. You could take all the 1% and tax them at 90%, and there's not even close to enough money to solve the problem. The only solution to the government's problem is going to be raising everyone's taxes. I'm sorry to be the one to break it to you. I'm a little more honest than the politicians because I'm not running for office. It's a math problem. It's a math problem. Again, to the right or wrong of it, it's just a math problem. If the government continues to spend at the rate they're spending currently, this is going to hit us, and probably by the end of the decade, in a pretty big way, which will bring me into the economics. And I'll do a little tax stuff towards the end. So questions, please. I got the list here, but I'm going to start with the biggest questions kind of all lumped into one, which is maybe tagging off a little bit about what Dr. Quincy Crosby talked about in our last webinar, is a little bit about the economy. So the economy is slowing, as we mentioned before. It's actually slowing down. It seems kind of unreal. The stock market is doing so well. The employment data is doing so well. How can the economy be slowing? What has pushed the economy forward since last fall was the amount of money the government is pumping into the system. We are spending, and when I say we, the United States, the federal government is spending just below the rate we were spending at during the height of the pandemic. We're tracking about 3.2 trillion, and there's a lot more coming, okay, in a year. Why am I bringing this up? This is a big deal. We have never, ever spent at this level before. The pandemic, the shutdown, that was an extraordinary situation. It was absolutely necessary. However, now that that's happened, what politician wants to say no? You know, they want to keep it going. So the current administration is spending at a rate just below the height of what we were spending during the pandemic. Now, I'm not picking on any political party. Any of you who listen to me do these talks over the years know that I pick on whoever's in office because they own it. I'm picking on Biden now, I picked on Trump, I picked on Obama, I picked on Bush, I pick on them all. The reason being is that, again, they're the ones running the show. But they couldn't do much of what they do without Congress's involvement. So it does take 2 to tango, or 3 to tango in the United States. So that being said, though, a lot of this is being pushed through. It's also an election year. And what politician, especially if they're running for re-election, doesn't want things to look as good as possible in that year? Both sides do it. They just do it in different ways. So again, this is not specific to the current administration. The amount, it's just so incredibly extraordinary, the amount of money. The first 600 billion went in last October, and it just keeps flowing. So this is a concern. Why is it a concern? Say, that's great. Hey, economy's doing well. Government spending. Wow, no big deal. Yeah, we know 34 trillion in debt. Sounds scary, but doesn't really affect my day-to-day life until it does. And I'm going to talk more about this in the coming years, but mathematically, the problem's going to hit later this decade. Won't take a lot of time with it today, because again, it's not today's problem. But even with this extraordinary spending and pushed in, is what's happening is we're starting to see how this is impacting the economy. First is the initial rush of, wow, there's all this money, right? Companies coming in, they're building a factory under the CHIPS Act, right? They got $600 million, I guess, or so. This factory, this company, it looks great. Well, yeah, you give me that kind of money, I'll build a factory too, right? It's government money pushed out to stimulate trying to bring infrastructure into the United States, to build factories, et cetera. It all looks good in the short term. It's a great boost. You know, the idea of employing more people, et cetera. And then the reality on the ground starts to happen is that we don't have the people. Is this going to be done by robots? What is the investment in this country? Where are the workers coming from? It's kind of like the bloom starts to go up the rose when the reality of the situation hits. And that kind of causes people to say, yeah, I'll take what's free, but I'm not sure how much more I'm going into it. So that's where you were kind of seeing hesitancy. We're getting this in earnings reports now, hesitancy of business investment. Not all companies and not all sectors, but we're starting to see where companies are going, we're just getting a little cautious here. Again, the growth can go on for a while. but there's caution in the wind based on, again, we just started getting an earnings season, so we only had a couple weeks of data, preliminary. I'll have more as we get further into the earnings season. The other one is employment reports look great. Wow, we got low unemployment. Everyone's working and wants to work. This is great. But we look at actually the details. So the Bureau of Economic Data, they release it, the BA releases all the information, and you can actually read the details. Okay, it's coming straight from the source. So no whatever news narrative attached, right? It's just the data. The government employment is going up rapidly. A good economy, government employment by government is somewhere around 7 to 9%. That's a good number. That's what we want to see. That's government employees. We're at 14.5, and we probably will go even higher as all of these programs unroll. That's not actually good for the economy. I'll explain why later, but it's not from an economic perspective because it's not organically growing. It's growing by the government, pass a bill, and they hire a bunch of people. Why? Low unemployment numbers look good. This is something the government can control to help stimulate the economy. But it's usually something where we see it, they kind of take a step back. It's like, okay, the economy is not actually doing this on its own. It's getting support. And I guess why is that concern? Because the support will change. The support will change because Congress will not continue to pass these bills. Whether President Biden is reelected or it's Donald Trump or somebody else in office, somebody has got to slow this down because it's just the ability to continue this type of spending is giving the warning signs. I actually almost feel bad for whoever the next president is because they're going to have to be a little bit more honest with the American people and cut back and pull back on some of this, and they're probably not going to be very popular for doing so. So that is sort of the one aspect of it. The employment is just looking at that. The other one is also looking at the employment is we have a demographic shift that's happening with significant numbers of people retiring every day based on the age and demographics. So the baby boomers, that big chunk of our population is shifting into retirement. And so the workers coming up, the jobs are very, very, very different. And we're starting to see a skills mismatch of the education and training that the upcoming workforce has in relation to the jobs that are actually in demand right now. Part of this is technology is changing so rapidly that even people who've been in technology for a long time are struggling to keep up with all the change, if you've been in the business for a while, and the new skills that are required, not just with AI, but just with the rate of change in this space. The other thing is it's just a lot of these jobs are less necessary, so the pay is starting to drop and be capped for a lot of these jobs. So I continue to say this. If you've got young ones going off to college, really, really, really make sure that they're investigating and really understand what the earnings potential is in relation to the cost of that degree, because the job market is really shifting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more on the employment because it's going to tie in later to this, just about other considerations there as well. And I'm going to jump out and get tons of questions, so I want to make sure I just cover the high level stuff very quickly. Sorry, mid-50s people, got to put the glasses on to make sure. Real estate I'll do last. The other biggie, inflation. So we'll talk about inflation. Previously, earlier in the year, I'd said that inflation is beginning to moderate. It is likely the Federal Reserve will begin to cut rates later in the year, by the mid half of the second half of this year. That was the original, what I said early in the year. And that was not my opinion. That was what the Fed was saying, right? I don't actually have an opinion what the Fed will do, anything more than what they say, because I don't know. But that being said, inflation is not slowing down. It's actually starting to bump up. It's staying very high in relation to what the Fed wants. The Fed wants it below 2. We're at 3.5. And all the data is going the other direction. Inflation is starting to not necessarily rise to the levels it was 2 years ago, but it's definitely stubbornly high. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. Why is that happening? Government spending. Too much money in the economy is causing inflation to stay higher than the Federal Reserve would like. They're postponing any cuts, at least for now. There's tremendous pressure on them by the current administration because they want the stimulus. They want the rate cut. They want to juice the economy. So the Fed's, not supposed to and generally doesn't react to political pressure. They have 2 mandates. Their mandates are low unemployment numbers and low inflation, and that's what their target is. So they likely are going to hold off cutting rates unless, and I'm not saying this would happen, the pressure is enough that they decide to do a little one just, to juice things up. But it's really dangerous if they do that, because the same thing happened in the 70s and inflation got worse much worse and stayed much longer when it wasn't fully contained. So imagine it like a fire. You have a fire in the forest. You have to make sure you put out the fire very thoroughly, dump a lot of water on it. There's not one spark or ember left, or the whole thing could rekindle and burn down the forest. It's very much the same with inflation. You have to be absolutely sure it's dead, because if it comes back, it comes roaring back far stronger than it was the first time around. So that's a challenge of the Fed, is the pressure to cut rates, right, to help the real estate market and to help for borrowing and help stimulate the economy, with the fact that we have this stubbornly high inflation because the Fed can't get the government to stop spending. It goes the other direction. Chairman Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, went on 60 Minutes about a month ago. Okay, and he actually spoke to the American people. Two things to note: the Fed chairman does not say anything that's not very, very targeted and very important. They're not one to get out there and just make a lot of noise. That's not who they are, because they know the entire world's economy listens to every word they say and every breath they take. They're really that closely followed. So for the head of the Federal Reserve to get on 60 Minutes is designed to get to the average American person, right? They're not talking to people like us and economists in Washington. They're talking to you on 60 Minutes. And Chairman Powell reiterated more than once his concern with the government spending and the impact that it's going to have on the U.S. Financial system. That's his words. The head of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, came out just recently and said the same thing. So we really need to listen to these people, regardless of our political leanings, regardless of our socioeconomic viewpoints, social viewpoints, etc. These are very wise people, and they're very concerned. So I do think it's kind of very important for all of us just to really, really be aware of this and really think about that when we're talking to our politicians, voting, or thinking about policy, is that it's nice to have it all, but at some point we've really, really got to cut this down, because it is having an impact. The IMF, you say, well, they're International Monetary Fund. They're not our boss. We're the U.S. What happens in the U.S. economy affects the entire rest of the world. We are that powerful. We saw that with the financial crisis, and we'll see it again with whatever the results of this are. So containing inflation is really important. And the only way we can really contain it is to get the spending down. We have to get the spending down. There's not much we as individuals can do about it. We really can't, because this inflation is two levels of inflation. There's the inflation, which is just too much money, right? We don't have enough goods for it. There's too much money in the system. The other one is that part of inflation is also government regulation, government expenses, government fees, new policies that have costs all get rolled into it. And you can see that when you look at, say, your water bills, your internet bills, and things like that. You'll see, oh, the fee for this, the fee for that, the fee for this. I'm not getting into whether it's right or wrong or good or bad. That's a matter of opinion, but it does drive up costs. So even the most noble causes that a politician comes up with, locally, state, federally, has a cost. And that cost is borne by all of us. Somebody has to pay for it. The government's going to pay for it by issuing more debt, or we're going to pay for it one way or the other. And that some of those costs will stay high even if inflation is defined by CPI begins to moderate. All right, a couple more things here, and then I'm gonna start hopping into questions. Let's see, geopolitical, and I covered that. Let's see, the geopolitical situation from an economic perspective. Well, we all know that it's getting a little wild out there. We have conflicts, multiple fronts, either really active conflicts or simmering conflicts. The things between us and China are not getting better. Blinken's trip to China went really badly, and we're not going to move the needle there. It's actually becoming more adversarial. It's becoming increasingly adversarial, and it's I have to understand, it's not just the U.S. and everybody else. It's also all the other countries' relationships, and there's a really big competition right now between countries developing their alliances. Economic alliances, military alliances, etc., or even just geographic alliances. This is going to continue to ramp up because now countries have options. So we have lost our ability to be the world's superpower in the sense of convincing everybody else to do what we want. That window of time between the collapse of the Soviet Union and the last couple of years, it was a unipolar world. U.S. was the boss, and we were the most powerful economy. But we do have other countries that are powerful in their own ways, in different ways, and you're seeing some of the results of this conflicts. Some of the conflicts are being supported by other countries that want to create this disruption. Okay? They want it because it helps benefit what they're doing. And they're the quiet ones. We don't hear much about them in the news. We hear about Russia, Ukraine. We hear about the Middle East. We hear about China. We hear about this. But there's a lot of other things happening in the world that are quieter ways of countries' interference and influencing other countries and their behavior. Even within the U.S., certainly a lot of the events that you're seeing happening within the U.S. are not, what is the case, self or organically grown, right? They're encouraged by other countries because having divisiveness within our country is beneficial. That's what ancient Rome did, divide and conquer. It's a very good strategy. So being very mindful of the fact that perhaps in the U.S., economically the shifts will take place is that we have greatly benefited from the trade arrangements that we've had for a very long time, which is why overall our costs of our goods to the consumer in the United States are less expensive than in most parts of the world. So, even the most basic things that we use, the fact that we can go to a Walmart or to a Target or to a Costco if you want to buy a flat of something, right? And buy things cheaper. Food and goods like this cost a lot more in a lot of the world. We have been able to take advantage of our buying power as a nation and also with favorable trade agreements. Those are starting to go away. We're already starting to see where these games are being played, and a lot of this is going to change. Regardless of who gets in the White House, a lot of it is outside of our control. Economically, that will start to have an impact on the average person because even if inflation is controlled, costs of goods will begin to rise because of the conflicts that are happening. Again, I'm talking more economic than the combat or the military activities right now. I feel like I'm talking about so many different things here. Okay, I'm going to jump into questions really quickly, so send more, and then I'll do real estate, and then the estate planning questions as well. So, alrighty. Good afternoon. Are we looking at raised taxes or cuts to spending? What might this look like? It will depend somewhat on the makeup of Congress and the White House. Government cuts and spending is easy in some ways, except for the one that's getting the spending cut is going to make a lot of noise about how it's going to destroy whatever group, right? So for an example, it hurts the children, it hurts the older people, it hurts this group. This politician is taking away food from a baby's mouth. You know, it's all hyperbole, right? So anytime you say, okay, we're going to give more to this group of people or more to everybody, anytime that's taken away, someone's losing funding in Washington, or some organizations or companies or whomever is losing the benefit. They will make the most noise through themselves or through their lobbyists, right? So, all of a sudden, taking something back to here's where it was during the pandemic, extraordinary times. We really, really had to make sure that everybody was okay. Now we're going to take it back to pre-pandemic. It's like, no, you're taking food from babies' mouths. It's going to be a fight. Government spending. So government spending sounds easy, but even the most wasteful, unnecessary spending, someone will get a lobbyist and they'll make a lot of noise in the media. And then doesn't matter who it is. The other, let's say it's a politician X is in office, and the other party is going to say how terrible this politician is. He's taking this away. It's all going to be a lot of noise, and people are going to get angry because they understand that we have to cut. And every cut we do, somebody is going to complain about. There's right now a sort of a thing within Washington, which is a bit concerning and somewhat new over this last couple of years, where the individual agencies, if I'm calling it the right word, within the government, I'll say Department of Labor, trying to think of all the Federal Trade Commission, all of these departments within Washington, SEC, banking conditions, whatnot, they've all been given a lot of power that has not historically been the case. So it used to be the president would propose something or Congress would pass something, right? You'd have a law in place that went through Congress, right? Everybody voted on it, it won, it passed. And then the instructions from this law would be passed on to the agencies that were responsible for enforcing those new laws or putting in place these new policies, right? Well, now it's kind of an interesting world. The current administration has given these agencies a lot more power to pass their own laws and their own policies without going through Congress. Now, of course, that's not allowed. So what happens is they pass this new rule and then immediately they get sued and it just gets stuck in the courts, and however they'll all play out. But we have this situation, and the reason for it is it's an opportunity to get more money for the government, right? Because if you pass a new law and it didn't even go through Congress, but the agency put it through, and now they say, well, now if you have a dog, you're all required to get it. I'm just making up something crazy here. Vaccinated, rabies, and everything like that, and you have to pay $100 a year to comply with this new dog vaccination rule. Again, I'm just making something crazy up here. Okay, well, you say, well, okay, that I have to comply, or I don't know, my dog can be taken away from me, or I'll get fined or something like that. So then there'll be an agency that'll be responsible for collecting all that money. And of course, not everybody will do it. And then they'll get fined. And now this agency has just created a whole new revenue source. I made up that silly example about the dog, but this is actually literally happening across the board right now with these agencies. I'm not going to take a lot of time getting into it. It's sort of out of the scope of the economics, but that's been a good bread and butter for these organizations. So does the government cut spending, again, by issuing debt? Say, okay, we're going to cut spending here, and then give these agencies more power to make up their own rules to make up the shortfall. Then we get into a situation where we've lost the balance of power and the checks and balances of the United States. So that's not a direction we want to go, but that's a direction that is being talked about and being tested right now as another source of government revenue. Raising taxes, it just depends how you do it. It's like anything else, is how you do it. How is it fairly spread about? You have a significant population in the United States that pays nothing in taxes, and you have a significant population that pays a lot more in taxes, and then you have a very high level people that pay the majority of taxes. The whole idea that billionaires don't pay taxes has been proven wrong by the government themselves. If you look at the data, the statistical data from the tax returns of where the money comes from, the ultra wealthy 0.1% or whatever are paying the highest taxes by and large. There's not a free lunch for them, but there's not a lot of them, so they don't bring a lot of money, and even at higher tax rates. So there are solutions outside of this. I mean, I actually could propose some, but outside of the scope of today's webinar, where you can find a good balance of cutting back some spending. A lot of it can truly be just by creating more streamlined efficiencies. Pick on the state of California for just a moment as I'm sitting here basking in its warm weather. The state of California has spent, just in recent years, and I don't recall the exact number, but many, many, many millions and millions, and maybe even there's a B in there, on homelessness. I mean, it's massive spending. The money's been put out there, and there's been no good results of it. The homeless situation has actually gotten worse. So can you take all of these disparate organizations that are working on this and kind of consolidate it and put a requirement, like, we'll give you the money, but you need to get some results. There's not a lot of that, I think, in Washington. And I'm using that as an example. I'm not picking on anyone that's working on this in California. I'm not an expert in it. I'm not saying they're not doing a good enough job, but I'm saying there's a lot of redundancies, a lot of multiple agencies doing the same thing. Can you cut that back? But it's hard, because if anyone says, let's cut out the waste and cut out the unnecessary extra layers of bureaucracy, then they're, vilified by the other side. So it's challenging. I like one of the politicians running for president had proposed putting all of the government spending onto blockchain, so it would be uneditable, and everybody could read it and see where the money was being spent. And I thought that was a great idea. You wouldn't have to depend on our politicians anymore. You could just look for yourself. Where's the money going? And, vote accordingly, of course. But yeah, the ultimate solution is going to be a combination of government cutting spending and taxes being raised. And just don't believe the politicians when they say it's only going to be the 1% that's paying more taxes. Math doesn't work. On the average, what percent for state and federal taxes? Move this over here. Federal taxes would you withhold after taking your RMD? There is no average. So the question is, when you take your RMD, your required minimum distribution, when you hit that age, you're required to from your IRAs or 401ks, what would you be the withholding? Everybody has a different one. It depends on your overall tax situation. As a high level, you can look at your tax return and you can see what your taxes are and have that much withheld, and you'll be kind of close in the ballpark. However, that's not perfect, because maybe that year something unique is happening to you, and you would want to withhold more or less. On the other hand, too, even just by the fact you're taking new income out that year will raise your taxes, so you may want to have more withheld. Individual question, definitely reach out for individualized advice, either to your planner or your CPA. The CPA will be able to give you that number as well. How much of our economic problems are from the current administration's policies? Oh, thank you. Put me in an awkward spot. It depends what you define an economic problem. Is tricky, right? So let's say somebody at the higher end of the socioeconomic scale is paying a lot more in taxes. They could say that was coming from the current administration with the tax increases. Whereas somebody on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale could say, oh, I'm benefiting from this new social program that now covers this cost. So it's not easy to answer that question on a broad scale. The biggest concern with the current administration, as I mentioned earlier, is the massive amount of spending, because it's like a high or a sugar high, right? You get a short-term boost, everything looks good, it's an election year, make it all look pretty, and then all this runs out by next year. So definitely if Biden gets reelected, he's going to have to spend again, right? He's got to keep it going because he's going to be in charge. And if he's not, if it's Trump or somebody else, right, then it's going to be their problem. It's a really good strategy from an election standpoint, but it's really destructive to the economy. It's challenging because our politicians are rewarded for short term, right? Our elections are every 4 years for the major and 2 years for the minor. So that really there's no benefit for them to think long term, to think about, oh my gosh, the math is going to get really bad by the end of this decade. We're going to have some serious problems with the entitlement programs. What are we going to tell people? It's the other guy's problem. It's like, it's not how they think. And if they're not rewarded, we as voters don't reward them for that, right? We're short-term thinking. What are we all thinking about right now? Short-term, right? The election that's happening this year. How many people are thinking about long-term? It's the news media fuels that, right? It's all noise. It's all around noise, short-term. We don't really think long-term. We don't really think, I'm willing to sacrifice my favorite party winning for the greater good of the global economy. Because understand that when the government gets up against the wall, as likely will happen later this decade, very early next decade by the math, everyone will suffer. It's not going to be just the wealthy. It's not going to be just the middle class. It's not going to be just the poor. Everyone will suffer because the cuts will be forced, and the cuts will be across the board. So it is a collective wisdom, you would say, to try to get people in office, in Congress, not just the presidency, Congress matters, that have some level of concern about this, or some reasonable ideas about how to navigate us out of it. And they don't get a lot of attention because they're usually moderate in their thinking. Maybe they're moderate Republican, maybe they're moderate Democrat, but they're moderate. And the noisy ones usually get more of the press. So going back to there always are solutions, but does require a bit more expansive long-term thinking, and not in the partisan head of it, right? My party has to win. My party has all the answers. Some of the smartest people with the greatest answers are moderates, and they work together. Please know that when I get my Washington report that they give to us economists every Monday, it is not political in any way. And there's always this great optimism that there's a bunch of people in Congress that are level-headed and working together, even if they have differences in opinions. There is hope for Washington. It's not all the crazy stuff we hear in the news every day. I say, what do you think about a flat tax? Alrighty, flat tax, I love the concept. I love the idea that everybody pays a percentage. Let's just call it 10% or 15%. Everybody, from the poorest person to the wealthiest person, pays a flat tax with very, very few deductions. And only deductions that can be arguably for the greater social good, like charitable deductions, right? Charities get billions and billions of dollars from individuals and corporations every year. We don't want to take that money away from them because they're doing some good work. So very limited deductions that can be definitely shown to have a greater good for the society. And a flat tax, the biggest reason for the flat tax to me is it's never going to be equal or fair, because you have to argue that a billionaire paying 15% is not going to benefit on that numbers. They're not going to get that much benefit from what they're paying into the system by any means. Whereas somebody who is at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, that 15%, they're going to get a lot more benefits than what they're paying into the system. So it's not equitable. But the reason I like it is I don't like the idea that people don't pay income taxes, because everybody benefits from them. So even if you're only paying $1, pay something. Put something towards the system that you're benefiting from. So some form of flat tax, I think, does create more equality. It's a hard thing to pass because tax code currently is used to create social policy, social behavior, I should say. A lot of behavior is created through tax policy. It's intentional. It's political a lot of times, but we have so many tax rules in there. That's why taxes are so complicated, to encourage certain behavior and discourage certain behavior. And different administrations may tweak that one way or the other. But it's going to change a lot if we got rid of a lot of these deductions and a lot of the more complicated parts of the tax code. But I do like the concept for sure. Okay, I'm going to hop into the real estate part real quick because I just want to make sure I'm covering everything. Okay, more questions coming in. I'm going to cover them all. I'll do my very best anyway. More questions. let me know. So that being said, real estate, everybody's big question, the real estate question. Two pieces of real estate. So let me talk a little bit about, we have commercial real estate, and then we have, let's say, the average residential real estate. I'll start with commercial because that's the bad news. Not all commercial real estate, not in all markets and sectors, but there are pieces of the commercial real estate sector right now that are in extreme danger and extreme risk, and there will be defaults. The chairman of the Federal Reserve has said this. They know it, they're watching it, and with it, we'll take down some regional banks. So the banking situation with the smaller regional banks that are heavy in specific types of commercial real estate are likely to continue to fail. This is laid out in the cards. It's unlikely to be any different, especially as rates are staying higher longer. So do expect that. Something I obviously pay very, very close attention to. You as people that are watching this, if you are holding large sums of money in a local or regional bank beyond the FDIC limits, I would strongly encourage you to reallocate that money into other banks. And if you want to talk to me more about some options there, just let me know. I can tell you kind of how to go about doing that. Outside, again, the FDIC limits, because there will be more of that. The reason being is this is the way it kind of works with commercial real estate. They have very high debt levels. It's just the way that that sector works. Some areas are doing really well, no risk, so it's not the entirety of the sector. Okay, there's a lot of it that's doing really well, but there are certain markets, specifically markets, let's say office space in coastal cities, as coastal states and cities is still struggling significantly. There are pockets of these markets that just are not able to sustain their, as a going concern, for lack of a better term. I don't want to take a lot of time going into the details of that. If anyways, any questions about commercial real estate, wants to talk to me, just talk to me offline because it's a longer conversation. But there are pockets of risk, there are pockets of likely default. And it is, in many cases, only the fault of the post-pandemic reality of people just not necessarily coming back to the office space. Companies needing less office space, companies diversifying their workforce into other states. So rather than having one huge office, say in San Jose, then they might have an office in multiple, smaller offices in multiple states. A really big telling idea of that was, if you guys remember, the Google city, where Google was going to build this big a workspace and a big living area and bought up all this land around downtown San Jose. They have now put that on hold indefinitely. They're seeing more benefit as their workforce wants to live in more areas, different areas of opening offices in different states and different regions to accommodate that. So it's really just a change in how we work and where people want to live. And that has put more leveraged companies at risk. So commercial real estate, not all of it. I'll tell you, hospitals all day long. All that Obamacare money that the federal government is pumps into the system to support healthcare from the Obamacare, you're just seeing this massive expansion in hospital and medical building space, and that will continue to happen. Unfortunately, what we don't have is enough doctors and healthcare workers to accommodate the need, and that's going to take a while to create that imbalance. So there's a career choice. That and veterinarians, don't have enough of those either. So that kind of gets commercial. Residential real estate, you got, again, a little bit tale of two worlds. You're starting to see some pushback against this massive buying up of real estate as rentals. You're seeing the pushback actually, interestingly, bipartisan. So you're seeing it from Democrat, Republican. You're seeing it in different states and also on a federal level. The talks are happening about starting to rein in the ability to go out and purchase a lot of this real estate and then put it on as rentals. Okay, and why this matters is because that drives up the cost of real estate, also drives up the cost of rents, right? And there's an idea of making housing affordable. Now, there's not going to be this giant socialist government takes it all over and makes it all affordable, but the proposals are creating higher taxes, fees for non-owner residents. The thing to consider with that is they're talking about the big companies that are doing it, but of course, it will never stop there. So it's likely going to be eventually trickling down potentially into other types of rentals. So people that bought a property for Airbnbs, people that bought properties for rentals, are starting to, the talk is having a tax if it's not your primary residence and it is a rental out there. Again, this is in its early stages, but the fact that it's bipartisan makes me think that it will happen in some form or another. Where you may see that is if it no longer makes financial sense for people to have multiple properties, Airbnb properties, rental properties, do you start to see this come on the market, and that creates more housing, which can bring prices down. Again, I'm not using this as a fear tactic because it's really going to hit the bigger buyers of this real estate, these bigger property management companies, well before it hits individuals. But there are individual counties in California that are talking about doing it to everybody. So that may put some pressure on these non-owner occupied properties and may or may not add more supply to the market. Overall, the cost of building is very high, which means the cost of real estate is going to stay very high, and that's going to be the foreseeable future. The government depends on the money for the fees they charge for planning and development and building. And so they can't really make those fees goes away because they need them for their expenses. Materials cost a lot of money. Labor is very high. It's just the reality of the cost. You could see costs come down if we have a major recession, but that's not a near-term thing. It would take a while. The trades are having the exact same issue of not having enough people. They don't have enough builders, enough qualified people to build, so that's driving up costs as well and delaying out projects. So overall, real estate, as any agent will tell you, is location, location, location. While interest rates seem high to us right now on mortgages, like, oh, when are the rates coming down? Historically, they're not that high. They really are not. We just had this a long period of time of very, very low mortgage rates. So that kind of set the bar that they should be 3% or 4%. And now they feel very high, but historically we are not outside of what the normal rates are. The difference is that housing has gone up significantly during the time rates were low. So as rates have risen and housing is high, just the cost to carry that mortgage has priced a lot of people out of the markets. And that, again, outside of some form of government subsidized housing, I don't really see how that's going to correct itself in the near term. And so because a lot of real estate questions came in, none of this is advice on what you should or shouldn't do about your property. That should always be done on an individual level because there's a lot of factors that go into it beyond just the high level economic reporting on these types of things. A really good real estate agent that knows that local market that you're looking to either buy or sell in, combined with a good financial planner that has an understanding of the strategies in there, and potentially even bring in your CPA as well for strategy to understand the tax consequences, especially in sales of property, and what the other options may be. Having a good team around you can really help what makes the most sense for you personally. If you're buying for the first time, there's a lot of options available out there now that is actually expanded under the current administration of ways that you can use other resources you may have to help and assist with that down payment and that first time house. So that's definitely something you want to be sure to talk to your CPA or your planner about. Okay, I'm going to go back into the questions here. So I did outlook on the real estate. Lots of election questions. I just want to make sure everybody knows we are going to have our Washington speaker, one of the two we've had in the past, doing the whole webinar for us. There's going to be the election and the economy. Okay, you're going to get it from the horse's mouth from Washington, D.C. We'll wait till after the primaries to do that because we got a little bit more certainty in this election. I know this is an election that's super close and a lot of emotions on it. I don't know if we've ever had two potential nominees that are as unpopular as the two are right now. So it's going to be almost like a Hollywood movie kind of election in a lot of ways. But I can speak about some economic. I know about the policies of I haven't looked at Jill Stein's yet, so I usually look at all the candidates. I will get hers reviewed before we do that talk. But I've looked at RFK, I've looked at Biden, I've looked at Trump based on what they've proposed on their respective websites. So I'll be able to pull that all together for an economic outlook on the candidates as we get closer, plus our Washington speaker. So forgive me for not getting too much into the politics yet. We got plenty of time for that still. Two questions that were similar. Where should I put my money? Should I put it into savings? Should I invest it? If so, what are people investing in? It depends. So it really depends on your individual situation. I don't have a name here, so I don't know who this is. What you do with your money really depends. And I'm sorry that it was that perfect answer. Sometimes you're wanting to preserve that money because you're going to use it for something in the short term. Maybe the stock market volatility is uncomfortable for you. There could be a lot of other factors going on that would make you be more inclined to have it in a very safe and secure place. Other times it could be money you don't need. And quite frankly, money in the markets grows almost double what money in conservative places grow over a 10-year period of time on average, factoring in volatility, 25 to 50% depending on the cycle. Okay, that's just a fact on the ground. But in order to get there, you also have those really uncomfortable, we call the bear markets, the price of admission. You want to go in the stock market, you want those great returns, your price of admission is you get fun downturns, right? It's kind of what we're going through right now. Remember Dr. Quincy Crosby when she was talking at the last webinar? She's a brilliant economist. You can't run straight up, as we have since October, without this. It's called, we call it different words for it, but in generally it's the market's digesting itself. But it needs this period of time to be able to digest. And you're going to have these big swings up and down as the markets figure out its next direction. So that's not as comfortable as the upcycle. So your price of admission is the pain of having these down periods of time. You can't figure it out. Nobody knows what it's going to do day to day. And then common wisdom is if you miss the 10 best days in 10 years, you get 50% of the return. Let that sink in. You miss the 10 best days in the stock market, in 10 years, you get half the return. So jumping in and jumping out is a fool's errand. It's better off to say, I can accept the ride. Money's going in. I don't need it in the short term. And I can accept the fact that it's going to get volatile sometime. But that, is not appropriate if you might need that money. So buckets of money is the most important. You have buckets conservative, buckets maybe moderate, buckets high growth, maybe even speculative. But it's very important to do this on a personal, individualized basis. Not what your friends are doing, not what the pundit on the news is telling you to do, or what you read in the paper. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. There's a world of opportunities out there. It's really important to be able to compare that. And again, talk to me. Talk to your, because again, you talk to your advisor if they're qualified to do planning and strategy like this. Talk to somebody, ideally someone that's not selling you something, because they'll be able to give you more objective advice. And they'll say what's best. And ideally show you the trade-offs too. So the pros and cons of each choice, so you can actually make the choice rather than you should do. You should do is generally really limiting on that. What's the talk about raising the Social Security age? There is serious talk about eventually raising the age. And when I say serious talk, there's a working group in Washington, D.C., comprised of Democrats and Republicans. This working group meets and discusses everything privately, and it is not disclosed to the public. Why? Because they're talking about how to solve for the Social Security problem we have, which is the lack of funding for the program in just a few short years. The reason they are not releasing anything publicly, or it's public that they meet, but they don't talk about anything, is because of the fact that it's such a highly sensitive topic, and they don't want to be seen as representing their party in any way. Just because, again, if anyone talks about reforming Social Security, immediately the other party comes out and points their finger and says, you're going to take away the Social Security, you're going to hurt the old people. It's all this noise. So the reality is these are smart people that are getting together. They're trying to find a solution, and they're not playing politics with it, right? But we get little tidbits of what they're thinking about in our Washington report. And it looks like the solution to it, and it ultimately is going to depend on what the makeup of Congress is, the presidency. Are we far to the left? It becomes more socialist. We are more to the right. It becomes more, I want to call it like freedom of how you invest your money. They talk about people can take their Social Security and put it in the stock market. There's a lot of ideas out there, but the working group is really looking at the kind of more moderate. It will be a combination of cuts and a promotion of a potentially higher age of collecting Social Security. Now, before you get worried, it's not going to touch anybody north of 50. It really is going to be the younger generations will plan for the fact we're living longer. You're not going to get Social Security until you're 67 instead of 62 or 70. They're going to bump out those ages a couple of years, and they're going to do it way in advance, and they're going to give people plenty of time to prepare. When Social Security was passed, most people died before they collected. Okay, now people are living on Social Security for 40 years. Longevity is actually the biggest, the biggest impediment to this program is the longevity. Cost of caring for people, and that ties into Medicare, is the second one. So there are solutions that are seriously being talked about. Eventually, they're going to be employed. They're talking about, and that is real, but it's going to take the right kind of politician that's going to be able to tell the American people that, because again, it's just such a sensitive topic. Another one is that certain levels of wealth and income, the benefits may be reduced or eliminated entirely. They'll probably start with, you're going to start with your billionaire class, and they'll move their way down over time, but it may start to become more of a social program rather than you put money into it, you get money out of it. That's what they're talking about. I'm not saying any of this will happen, how it will happen, but it's they are talking to look at solutions. So don't believe any of the politicians when they tell you the worst is going to take away your Social Security, because that's just noise. Alrighty, I'm running up at the end, so I think I covered enough of this that I can save the other ones for next time. I'm just going to check the last place. Sorry, I try to be really good about getting this done on time. So I think I got all the big questions there. I will close out with this. I know it's a lot. I talk very quickly, and I'm kind of pulling information from a lot of different sources and talking about things in different orders. It's because I really want, again, to provide you with as much information as possible. If anything I said today is like, I want to understand this more, just reach out to me. I really enjoy sharing it. I really enjoy people understanding and how, again, these things can impact their lives. And I'll leave everyone with sort of the parting comment to all of this is, don't worry about the news. If it stresses you out, turn it off. There's very little that you actually have to know with the big national news. It is mostly noise designed to keep you in a state of fear, so you keep watching it and they can sell lots more advertising. You'd be more benefit to be informed of your local issues, what's happening in your local communities, and you can largely stay away from the national if it's creating a lot of stress. From it, on the economic side, certainly, and know this if you're clients of mine, I'm paying very close attention, and I'm filtering out what is really important and what is really not important at the moment, and also for the long-term planning. But the reason I say to consider staying away from it is sometimes people come up and are really, really stressed about things that ultimately don't really have a lot of impact. And to be able to be in that space where you don't have to worry more than is necessary is usually a good thing. So that's kind of the ways I watch it, so you don't have to. How's that? And so if questions arise, you can always reach out. Again, the intention with all of this is giving the information in a way that's relevant and connected to your life. And so your questions are really valuable to me as I share this on kind of a high level. Also, I'm very open again to talking to anyone and answering the questions on a more specific level if you have them, or give you sources if you want to see sources for the information I share today. Happy to do that as well. With that being said, we're going to go through some shifts here in the economy this year. So the one thing to be able to keep in mind is as these shifts happen, there'll be what's called noise and what's called important. We act on the important and we just discount the noise. Next month's seminar, webinar, not seminar. Next month's webinar, for those of you that were at the painting party, yay, we all got to be an artist for a day. You had an opportunity to hear from Brian Nash. He's a VP of Goldman Sachs, and he was only supposed to talk for a couple of minutes. He was just there at the event. He was going to share a couple of things, but everybody got so into it, we actually talked longer. So we're going to have him back. We're going to have him here in the webinar, so everybody, regardless of your geographic location, and even if you don't want to go to a painting party, can hear him speak. So Goldman's a pretty sharp firm, and Brian will be on our next webinar giving his company's view on the economy. And so if you have any questions for them, let me know. I'll post it. Thank you all very much for listening today or in the future when you get this recording. And again, it's an honor to be in service, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye for now.